Hey everybody, it's Hater, and in this one we're going to be using the new Elemental Well mod, Elemental Shards, and explain why you should be using it. But before we get into that, if you enjoy the builds that we make, then go ahead and leave a like, comment down in the comment section what you think would be better, and subscribe if you really like the content. Also go support me over at my Twitch, it'll be in the description. With all that out of the way, let's get into it. Now that we're approaching week 4 of Season of the Lost, a new set of Elemental Well mods should be available from the Wayfinder's Compass. And if you couldn't guess, it's still not Elemental Shards, but we're going to talk about it anyways because it's going to be out very soon. But before we talk about Elemental Shards, what are Elemental Wells? Elemental Wells are these energy pools that you'll be seeing on the ground that come in many colors and flavors, all correlating to what mod is creating the well. Picking them up is going to give you energy to your lowest ability, but if it is matching your subclass type, it's going to give you energy to all 3 of your abilities. Now, take all that knowledge and then throw it out the window, because what Elemental Shards does is that it makes every stasis shard that you pick up count as a stasis well. What is a stasis shard, you might ask? Stasis shards are these floating crystals created by the harvest aspects on all 3 subclasses. Glacial Harvest for the Warlock, Tectonic Harvest for the Titan, and Grim Harvest for the Hunter. All of which have their own requirements to create stasis shards. For the Warlock, every time you freeze a target, it's going to create stasis shards around those frozen targets. For the Titan, shattering a stasis crystal is going to create stasis shards. And for the Hunter, defeating slowed or frozen combatants will create stasis shards. And after you pick the shards up, it's going to give you melee energy. But then this comes full circle back to Elemental Shards. Why do we want to use this? Because keep in mind, every single shard is going to count as a elemental well. Most of the time, all elemental well mods will really create only one elemental well. And then you can use other elemental well mods like Elemental Charge, where picking up a elemental well gives you a stack of Charge with Light, and if it matches your subclass type, it's going to give you 2 stacks of Charge with Light. Meaning, every time we get a stasis shard, it's 2 stacks of Charge with Light, unless Bungie makes it where there's a cooldown on elemental shards. This combo not only is just phenomenal, but it opens up so many doors to so many builds that we can run with this. And in HaterTheOne fashion, we're going to be making 3 stasis shard builds for you guys, 1 for each class. But no build is complete without the proper weapons. And what better to synergize with stasis shards than the Headstone perk, where whenever you get a headshot kill against an enemy, it's going to create a stasis crystal on their body. This currently only rolls on 3 different weapons: the Vulpecula 180 RPM hand cannon, the Peace Bond sidearm from Iron Banner, and the Reed's Regret Trials of Osiris linear fusion rifle. All 3 of those phenomenal weapons. But we're not really going to be using Reed's Regret because it's not meant for Headstone. It's a heavy weapon. You're not going to be spending your heavy ammo that could be used for DPS on a perk like Headstone. No, we're going to be using this on both Peace Bond and Vulpecula because both are going to be solid for mobbing. Because whenever an enemy is near the crystal that spawns from the headshot, they are frozen. That will help Glacial Harvest for the Warlocks because an enemy is frozen. You could then shatter that crystal and proc Tectonic Harvest for the Titan. Or, if an enemy is near the crystal, you could shatter dive it and also create shards because you're killing enemies with a stasis crystal. That is only what I can think of off the top of my head, let alone what you could do with it in practice. So, let's actually make some builds with these. Starting off with the first build of the bunch, the Warlock, my favorite. For the aspects, we're going to be running Glacial Harvest and Bleak Watcher. Bleak Watcher allows us to consume our grenade and turn it into a stasis turret. That will first slow an enemy, then freeze them. Proccing Glacial Harvest. Pretty much this build is just improving upon my stasis turret build that I covered last week. That'll be on the top right if you are interested in checking that out for a full breakdown. But moving on to fragments. Starting off with Whisper of Torment. Every time we take damage, we gain grenade energy. Then we're going to use Whisper of Conduction to then suck in the stasis shards if we're nearby them, also getting some stat bonuses from it. Then we use Whisper of Chains, so whenever we are near a frozen target or a stasis crystal, it's going to give us damage resistance. This is going to be really helpful in GM scenarios or higher tier difficulty scenarios because we're always going to be freezing targets as a Warlock. And finally, we're going to be using Whisper of Fissures to increase the AoE damage on shatters. This spot is also flexible. You can change this out with other whispers, such as Durance for increased slow, Bonds on shatter kills, or for Whisper of Hunger where you gain more melee energy from Stasis Shards. As for the loadout, a few exotics I would recommend to run would be the Verity's Brow for more grenade energy off of matching elemental kills. You could pair this with your Peace Bond or Vulpecula and then have a PvE Reed's Regret in your heavy slot to keep getting the procs off for death throws. You can also pair this with the Traveler's Chosen, and whenever you throw an ice turret down, it'll turn Traveler's Chosen into a stasis sidearm for the time being. Pretty helpful. Another option you could run is the Nezarec Sin and then use Lawrence Driver in your special slot so that you gain a synergy off of void kills. And on top of that, keeping up with particle deconstruction for major or boss DPS. As for the mods, you put elemental shards inside of your arms, and then you also pair that with grenade kickstart. Every time you throw your grenade or fully use your grenade, it's going to give you grenade energy back. Next, you would be using Elemental Charge, where every time you pick up a Elemental Well, it gives you stacks of Charge with Light, and if it matches your subclass, you get 2 stacks of Charge with Light. We pair that with the mods Charged Up and Supercharged, gaining a total of 5 Charge with Light stacks. We use those stacks on the mod Energy Converter, where every stack of Charge with Light after we throw our grenade gets consumed, converting it to super energy up to 50% of our super. And that covers the Warlock build. Moving on to the Titan. There are going to be 2 different aspects you can pair with Tectonic Harvest. The first being Cryoclasm. After sprinting for a short duration, you can then have a superpowered slide that shatters stasis crystals. This is relatively good in solo or low tier content outside GMs, so you can just ape your way through all the crystals. But if you're up in higher tier content like Grandmaster Nightfalls, you'd use Diamond Lance, where every time a frozen target dies, it creates a frozen spear that you can pick up and throw to freeze another target, or AoE freeze a bunch of targets. For the fragments, you'd be running the same thing, Whisper of Conduction, where stasis shards will be sucked into you at a certain distance. Whisper of Chains, where you take less damage around stasis crystals or frozen targets. And in the Titan's case, we can use Whisper of Rhyme, where whenever we get a stasis shard, it's going to give us a stackable overshield for 10 seconds. The reason we want to use this is to pair with the exotic Heart of Inmost Light, where whenever we use an ability, it's going to enhance and improve the other 2 abilities and increase their regen and damage over the period of time. This allows us to spam ice abilities a lot faster and maintain ability uptime. But the main reason we are using this exotic is so whenever we throw our ice wall down and throw our barricade next to it, it's going to shatter all of the crystals and create Tectonic Harvest shards that we then pick up and gain a full overshield for 10 seconds. Then we can further enhance this with more mods, such as Well of Potency, where every time we pick up a matching elemental well, it's going to give us super energy on top of that. Elemental Charge, same as the Warlock. And if we really want to be a walking tank, then we can use Protective Light to have 5 stacks of Protective Light. Or we could also use Font of Might, where every time we pick up a elemental well that matches our subclass, it's going to give us a 25% damage bonus to that damage type matching our subclass for 10 seconds. You could pair that with the Linear Refusion Rifle Reed's Regret with a God Roll, and you can do some pretty good damage with it. Or you could also pair it with the other new elemental well mod, Elemental Time Dilation, where all time-related elemental well mods we have is going to be able to be stacked and increase their effects per one that we stack. So if we have that mod on and use 2 Fonts of Might, it's going to make it where it is a 20-second timer instead of a 10-second timer. Overall, Stasis Titan is probably going to be the most flexible of the bunch. Moving on to Hunter. We're going to be doing something different for the Hunters this time, where instead of using Shatter Dive, we're going to be using Touch of Winter, where every single one of our stasis grenades are going to be enhanced in some way. Ice Wall is more of a ring when you throw it. The Suck Grenade is going to be larger and have a mini stasis crystal in the center, and the cold snap grenade is going to be able to create a stasis shard on the first freeze and then chain another extra time. The main utility of this is going to be the increased dust field grenade, so we can pull more enemies together. For the fragments, we're going to be using the same thing like last time for the other two classes, Whisper of Conduction, where stasis shards when we're nearby them are just going to get sucked right into us. Then we use Whisper of Durance for increased slow duration on adds so we can maintain Grim Harvest, and combo that with Whisper of Hunger and Whisper of Fractures, where we gain more melee energy when enemies are near and stasis shards give more energy. The reason we use Fractures and Hunger is because it's going to correlate to a melee build we're going to be running. Because, as for the exotic, it's pretty much up to you what you want to use. You can use practically any exotic. What we're going to be using is Lucky Pants for this build. Or at least that's what I like to run on my hunter when I'm running this build. Because if you didn't know what Lucky Pants does, it's going to increase the damage of your kinetic or energy hand cannons if they match your subclass for 10 seconds once you pull them out. This allows you to hit some pretty high damage numbers and is basically meta for hunters right now for DPS. We use that for something like Malfeasance, Vulpecula, or Crimson, and we can hit some pretty high damage numbers. As for the mods, same thing as for the other two classes, we're going to be using Elemental Shards and Elemental Charge. But then we're going to be using Heavy Handed, where every time we use our charged melee, it's going to give us half of that melee back, consuming 1 stack of Charge with Light. In other words, if you have 2 shurikens and you have 2 stacks of Charge with Light, you throw 2 shurikens, you have another shuriken there. You can throw 3 shurikens. But I'm not done yet. We're going to be using the other mod, Thermoclastic Strike, which allows our shurikens to overload champions, and when they get overloaded by our shuriken or another teammate overloads them, it also gives our shuriken back. Then we pair that with Thermoclastic Blooming. Every time we kill something with a stasis charged melee, it's going to create an orb of light, and this counts for every kill with the shuriken on ricochets, allowing you to just outright gorge on orbs of light. Then we also use Hands On from the artifact to gain super energy on those melee kills, and just constantly repeat the cycle of build up, charge with light, spend it on melees, get our melees back, etc. And I believe that is going to be covering all 3 of the builds I put together for you guys for Elemental Shards. Now, as I said before, you can build upon these builds or just use them as templates for your own builds. But that's going to be it, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'm going to catch you guys in the next one. Bye bye.